All right, kicking things off. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us in this session today. I'm very much looking forward to kicking things off. Let's start with a bit of an introduction about myself. My name is Pierluigi Cao. I am Regional Director for Field Services in the APAC region for GitHub. I have been at GitHub for about 5 years. I have a background in software engineering and later as an engineering manager and tech lead prior to joining GitHub. My first commit on GitHub is from 2011, so it's been quite a while that I've been, in a way, connected to this company, mostly as a developer in the start and later having been part of the team. In today's session, we will be focusing on how to increase efficiency, drive collaboration, and deploy secure and compliant code using enterprise-ready tools. Developer productivity is an important metric, and it can be pretty difficult to quantify and define it. So perhaps an easier question to answer is what gets in the way of developer productivity? For many organizations, things like tech sprawls, lack of collaboration, and time-consuming manual processes really prevent developers from focusing on what matters most, shipping new and innovative features. Tooling itself plays a crucial role in the successful rollout of a modern application development strategy, and developer satisfaction significantly impacts productivity. So today we will be hearing directly from top industry leaders about their experiences and lessons learned in their quest to accelerating development lifecycle in complex environments. Before we get right into it, I'd like to share a few tips for an optimal experience in today's session. First of all, we would like to hear your questions. So if you have any questions, there is a dedicated tab on the right side of your screen, Q&A, so click on that and feel free to drop your questions in that chat box. Our chat moderators are here to assist. We will be joined later by our one and only Michelle Mannering. She will be keeping an eye on the questions, and we will cover them towards the end of the panel. So make sure to interact with us. Lastly, if you at any point in time hear anything that's interesting to you, or you would like to talk to our GitHub experts, feel free to click the button at the top of the screen to request a demo or to schedule a meeting with us. We'd be delighted to reach out to you. In terms of the actual viewing experience, we recommend using a modern browser on your desktop. If you are having issues with the stream, try refreshing the page. That usually helps it, fixes it. If you're still experiencing problems, maybe you're on a VPN, so try disabling the VPN. And lastly, if you're still experiencing issues, there is a document in the docs section on the side of this website where you can find additional troubleshooting information. And also try to interact in the chat. We will keep an eye on the chat as well. Now, before we jump into the speakers, I'd love to introduce our panel, of course, but I would like to start a poll first, as I would like to know where you are joining us from today. So let's bring that on the screen. Please select your option from the poll. We'll take a look after we've introduced our speakers. So let me do that. Okay, fantastic. As I said, we have an amazing roster of panelists today. I'm extremely excited to be here and to have a chat with them. So we'll hear from them how they actually remove roadblocks and increase developer productivity in their organizations. They'll also be discussing how they're able to meet their business goals by shipping new features and product innovations faster and at a higher quality. So please join me in welcoming Kaushik, Tim, and Helen. And folks, I'd like to invite you to share a few words about yourselves, your role, maybe where you're dialing in from. I forgot to say I'm dialing in from Singapore. So please touch on that and also share a little bit about your organization. So let's start with Kaushik.
All right. Thanks, PC, for having me. I'm Kaushik. I'm dialing in from Bangalore, India. I head software engineering at UDAAN, which is a e-commerce platform. It initially started with catering to a lot of B2B side of things. In my roles and responsibilities, I take care of the core and the infrastructure side of things, as well as the SDLC side of things, which leads to developer productivity. apart from managing a couple of other products, I have been with UDAAN for a little over 3 years now. Prior to this, I've worked in organizations like Flipkart and Ola, and before that, I was with Yahoo. Prior to that, I was, one of the developers at WinApp, which is part of this company called as Nullsoft, that AOL acquired at some point in time. So that's a little bit about me. Excited to be here, along with everybody else, to have this chat today.
Thank you so much, Kaushik. How about you, Helen?
Hi everyone, my name's Helen Lau and I am one of the chief engineers in Commonwealth Bank. So for people outside of Australia, you might not know, Commonwealth Bank of Australia is one of the largest banks. I have close to 20 years of industry experience across technical consulting, software engineering, architecture and management background. So I've only been with the bank just over a year. Prior to the bank, I was with Microsoft as the ATS, which is account technology strategist, and I was looking after the largest Azure account in Australia and doing a lot of cloud adoption, digital transformation, sustainability implementation across the organization for the client. And prior to Microsoft, I was the head of digital in Caltex Australia or Ampol Australia. I was leading the innovation lab and across digital software development, big data, and productivity applications. So I'm here representing CBA. Basically, CBA, my team is the central engineering team across the bank. So I look after all the tooling, all the engineering, DevOps sort of tech stack. For the bank, and that's all, keeping the bank running is the back end of the back end is my baby. I will hand over to you, Pizzy.
Awesome, Helen. Thank you so much. And obviously, let's switch over to Tim.
Sure. My name is Tim Denley. I'm the CEO of KPMG Ignition Tokyo, which is a engineering team within KPMG here in Japan. I've spent the last 10 years or so building engineering teams inside of professional services firms to service both the firm itself as well as our clients with new modern technologies based on the engineering discipline. I'm also one of the primary sponsors of a global initiative within KPMG that we call KPMG Code, which is really focused on how do we provide the best possible environment for our engineers to not only get their day-to-day work done, but actually to connect with the rest of the engineers across KPMG in the inner sourcing approach to try and do less reinvention of things and actually spend more time building cool stuff. So that's who I am. I've been based in Japan for about 20 years now, but originally came from an engineering background and have found myself in professional services for the last 15 or so years.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. And what a diverse group, I would say. We have, India, Japan, Australia, and also very different, I would say, industries represented in this session. So very much looking forward to jumping right in. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can bring up the results of our poll, see how that goes. Let me take a quick look. Okay, so I see there's quite a few folks dialing in from India. Amazing. Southeast Asia coming in on second place, and then Australia, New Zealand. But we do have, obviously, quite a few more from other parts of the region, so that is amazing. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Okay, beautiful. So without further ado, I would say we'll kick right into this conversation, and I would love to start by maybe setting a bit the tone around productivity, right? This is a very simple word, which I think hides a ton of complexity, a little bit of like an iceberg, right? Very easy to think about, but also very hard to measure, very hard to make sure that we're also measuring the right things, that are not introducing artificial metrics that don't really help actually achieving our goals as complex organizations. So I'd like to ask you, maybe starting from Helen, what does productivity mean for you? And maybe if you can walk us through how you, CBA and your organization in particular, how do you measure productivity?
Thank you. I'll start. So productivity, how we see it in CBA is how long does it take from ideation to production, as in the features available to our customers. That's what we mean by productivity, how fast we can deliver our features to our customers. And across the bank, we actually run one of the largest bank in Australia. So we have many different sector or area in our business unit in terms of this retail banking, this business banking, and so on and so forth. So each of the area and the business and the nature and the customer is quite different. So we can't really use a one size fits all to measure the productivity. However, from conceptually, what we're seeing is from idea to the build and delivery of those features to our customer, that will be the same measure. And that's what we internally adopt a flow framework, measuring basically from our in terms of ideas and the proper kickoff of that initiative, and how many days does it take for us to ship that feature to our customer. And we are doing this engineering transformation across the bank to measure how fast we're moving right now. So we are deeply embedded in this transformation journey, and we'll love to share, some of the result once we are, having a snippet of that. And that's my definition, and across the bank, what we're measuring now.
That's excellent. And maybe let's ask Kaushik the same question. What about you?
Sure. So I think I'll go with what Helen said in terms of how do you sort of go from an ideation phase to actually putting that artifact out there. However, what we also do is we put certain metrics to it, like for example, what are the number of successful deployments that are happening. While these are sort of indicative of the overall goal, remember, at the end of the day, it's also about the quality of the feature, how complete is your product. I think all of those things are important, but what keeps us honest are these metrics. Like for example, at UDAAN, we end up doing close to 12 successful deployments an hour across our stack. And if that metric were to go one way or the other, maybe the deployments increase, but they're not successful. That tells us something about quality. So those are things that sort of tell us how productive we are. As systems grow over time, they inevitably become complex. Hence, it's important to look at those metrics and try to make sure that if any of your microservices are leading to a slowdown on productivity, that's a proxy towards understanding that certain systems need certain kind of focus, and hence those metrics become very important. The productivity metrics, at the end of the day, you don't end up getting too fascinated by those numbers. It's important to make sure that you're not just looking at those numbers because those metrics, because they can sometimes mislead you in terms of thinking that your org is actually very productive. But it's very important to keep looking at those numbers because they tell you if there's something going wrong into your systems, right? So that's what productivity really means. It's about how you're trending as far as your core metrics are concerned on your SDLC lifecycle, and then you proxy it towards understanding how effective your subsystems are, and then you invest if required in each of those areas. So yeah.
Thanks, Kaushik. Very interesting. And if I may rephrase a little bit, it sounds obviously time to market seems to be a shared approach to that. And I like the fact that that is a team level metric to begin with, right? So we're not necessarily focusing too much on the individual amounts of commits or things like that, which actually in our experience, we've published several studies and surveys, and we find ourselves to be in line with that. We believe obviously team level metrics produce better outcomes for the organization.
Yeah, so PC, let me just add one other thing there. I think at an individual level, it's still important to ensure that you're keeping your PRs concise. You don't necessarily want to end up having a PR that is pretty thousands of lines, because at that point in time, you're inevitably compromising on the quality. You're pretty just lucky that something has not broken in production, or maybe, and the hard ones are those which have a deferred impact. So at an individual level, we still track the the standards that one is supposed to follow towards guidelines, etc. But we don't necessarily look at that as a velocity metric. It's really a quality metric at an individual level that one needs to.
Yeah, more like a qualitative metric. Yeah. I agree, makes sense. So Tim, maybe switching over to you, obviously feel free to share your thoughts on the same, but maybe let's also look at the role of tooling, automation, things that can help, achieving these results.
Sure. So I was thinking about the way I look at productivity is almost in two lenses. So one is very much what we're talking about here in kind of the time to value, and ensuring that we're able to release things that have value in the shortest possible time, so that we can continue to maintain that velocity. And the second one is a little bit closer to that second part, which is really around how am I ensuring that my dev time is actually the most productive that it could be, and trying to both reduce the cognitive load and burden on our engineers, so that they're not spending time trying to figure out problems that are inherent in the tooling or the underlying environment in which they're trying to get their work done, so they can actually focus on and accelerating the time to value. And absolutely the tooling and automation is where that starts to come in, as well as I think is the ability to leverage tools to discover shortcuts. So anywhere I can give a developer access to something that lets them say, well, I don't want to be focused on this particular part of that path to production. I really want to focus on the bit that I'm good at and the problem that I'm trying to solve. Giving them discovery of ways to short circuit and shortcut through to get to the value is really important. And so discoverability, ability to share, and all of those things that come out of not just building automations, but then giving people access to them.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned earlier, the magic word, which is inner source, right? So the idea that organizations can replicate that same sort of, let's say, those same best practices and patterns that have emerged in the open source community in terms of collaboration, transparency. So I'd like to maybe ask about that. Like, how is that journey, right? Is that being part of your journey in how you've approached a sort of a modern development sort of approach?
Yeah, it definitely is. And KPMG is a relatively unique organization in that we're a very, very big federated network of member firms around the world. And what it means is that we've got pockets of engineering all over the place. And they're all building great stuff that can help other engineering teams around our network, but often they're not being able to get access to that, either because they don't know who those people are, or they don't have the right tooling to actually give them access. The other really important aspect of this for KPMG is really around compliance and risk management. So if you think about the brand of KPMG and the drive around trust, it's been really critical for us to be able to not just share things, but also share the construct around security. So, our approval process and our evaluation of code, looking all the way into things like the usage of open source and whether or not it's approved usage of open source tooling or code pieces that we're able to automate some of that and make it really easy for teams to actually share. So rather than reinventing the wheel every time and duplicating our efforts across a huge global network, what we're actually trying to do is say, here are ready access to stuff that other people have done. Go use it, leverage it. Where it's already been risk approved, that's going to accelerate your project by whatever degree that is, and make it really easy for people. Yeah.
And have you also used GitHub Actions, for example, to help accelerate, those processes, those workflows around CI/CD potentially and more?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a wide range of tooling, and teams are definitely beginning to shift into the GitHub ecosystem around this. We've seen really good usage of automations on things as simple as, for example, does a repo have a license in it? And again, in the context of a big network of member firms, the licensing construct is really important. Can I use this? Is it available for use? And so there's an automation that checks a repo whether it's got a license file, whether it's a license file we understand. And if it doesn't, it suggests that you need one.
Helen, maybe asking you, obviously, being head of engineering in a large bank, obviously inner sourcing, I'm expecting is also a very interesting topic. Could you maybe share some of the challenges that you faced or some of the strategies you've adopted in CPA?
100%. I'm actually very much aligned with Tim's comment on automation. So as I touched on earlier, the bank actually have a very diverse type of customer that we need to deal with on a regular basis. So from business banking to markets to retail banking, they're very, very different, both in terms of process, both in terms of the customer and the features that we need to provide, and the product need to support that. As a commonality is like basically how I see it is the automation and the CI/CD pipeline. How can we minimize and make sure we have deliver all the features safe, secure, and sound? And the way to achieve that is think of your test sort of automation, like unit test coverage. Think of how you automate your environment scaffolding for your SIT and so on and so forth. And we're looking now at the moment is pipeline as code as well as approval, auto approval along the way. Because our vision is basically if the developer is working on something is already existing application, then the pipeline should be established. The process approval should be established. And the risk posture for that should be lower, because as long as we're not dealing some radical change, because we're trying to make it small change and as frequent as possible to production, rather than those, we call it quarterly or monthly releases, which it would touch probably 100 or 50 applications that you will require a lot of approval, customer service support to review, make sure the cost center is informed, make sure everyone's standby. Those days are what we realize is we actually need to walk away, because now with cloud computing, with the tooling, with automations, we can actually put them in a bite size, and the risk postures and the blast radius is quite contained. And that will allow us to basically every day to ship as many change into production as possible. Just give context, like in terms of build from our CI, we do over 1,000 to 2,000 build a day. So if I have to bundle that to be a monthly release, that's crazy. So we're looking at, every day, what can we ship to production? Like each team will work according to the agenda, but how we do this is through automation, through test coverage, through all the auto approval, provided the guardrails are met. So that doesn't mean that we allow engineers, finish cutting the code and then ship to production straight away. It's actually to go through all these stage gate. Rather than a manual stage gate, we're trying to automate these approval and checking process. For example, secret vulnerability checking, those should be fundamental 101 as part of the pipeline, as part of either your commit, your PR, that we invoke these process and auto approve, provided these criteria are met, you are now safe to go to production with your change. And that doesn't mean that we bypass any of these stage gates. It's actually to automate all this checking so we don't have to do it manually. And that over time will actually bring our tech debt down, because sometimes we might do things, to do a quick, delivery to production, but it will be a shortcut. We might need to come back and fix it later. But by doing the automated, checking process, and the engineer actually totally shift left, they see these blockage right at the dev or the test stage already before they hit the production release. Because what I observed throughout my career is a lot of times engineers finish doing coding, testing, when they get to production release, they face a huge stage gate either by cyber or change release team or service management team. Have you done all this stuff? So that's sort of the shift right approach. But with the tooling and automation that we have today, on actions on the GitHub ecosystem, things like that, we can leverage a lot of these vulnerability checking, secret scanning, things like that, that can bake into our solution as part of the automation. So I'm 100% sort of, what we're thinking aligned with what Tim mentioned on automation. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Helen. And maybe as I segue, and ask a similar question to Kaushik, I'd love to hear, what you just walked us through is really the eternal struggle, between velocity and security/compliance, right? Like a lot of organizations, of course, want to accelerate. They want to hit the market, as soon as possible, but without sacrificing security. And as you said, the shift left approach, so the DevSecOps approach, if you want to use a buzzword, allows us to change that, right? And as you said, I used to be in that position as a software engineer where, my work was done as, hopefully before a Friday, right? Like on a Thursday afternoon, I was ready to click deploy, and then, there came the dreaded security report, which meant going back to square one and starting from scratch. Usually without a lot of guidance, which wasn't obviously a great experience. As a software engineer, your job is already hard enough, and then if you add security expertise on top, yes, the spectrum becomes even more broad. So DevSecOps, inner source, automation, all these things, I think, end up playing a major role in how we can really help the industry, right, as a whole, accelerate software development. So maybe Kaushik, how is that looking like for you?
Sure. So I think all good points in terms of automation that others talked about. Specifically, when it comes to security, the way we look at it at UDAAN is, it's almost, security is by design, in the sense that it's not an afterthought. So it's a lot more controlled centrally through central constructs, and tooling actually tells you there are violations of those. So as an engineer, you're not really figuring those things out post facto. However, just want to call out one aspect that we solved in the very early days of UDAAN. We realized that when it comes to productivity, right, I think it's important to make sure that you're looking at engineering experience. You want to take away the anxiety that an engineer has. That's your North Star, right? And of course, you sort of have some amount of measures for that. What you do is you want to take away the anxiety and the overheads that come with it when you're sort of asking an engineer to sort of build a non-functional or functional use case. What that does is it lets the engineer focus on the problem at hand, and everything else is taken care by systemic interventions and intelligence. I remember leveraging GitHub Actions a couple of years back towards some of the CI/CD aspects. But what we also did is, and a lot of those learnings came for us through our RCAs, where we realized certain kinds of mistakes, usual suspects, if you may, that engineers were making, and then we lintered them. So even if you were to make a mistake because you did not know the right way to do an implementation of, let's say, some threading in a particular programming language, that was already taken care of. And that was taken care of in your GitHub Actions. What we also did over time is while in the deployment cycle, these systems told you if something can go wrong. Even if it went wrong, we ended up building constructs that could do auto rollbacks. So you're really taking away the fear of, and software engineering, I'm hoping all of us will agree, is fraught with a lot of unknowns. What we tried to do is we tried to create that safety net that allowed engineers to make mistakes if they make honest mistakes. But what we did is we created that system in place that let the engineers learn from those mistakes without creating too much damage to the product overall, right? So that was the tenet, and towards that we did a bunch of things. We ended up building Canary. We had Canary-led deployments. We introduced chaos in the network. Like, for example, we introduced partitioning. We introduced jitters to see how certain use cases perform. And that's the journey that we continue with. We ended up building, for example, SQL Server is something that we use, where writing bad queries is very easy, especially when you're when you're a startup, sort of looking at pace, you end up writing schemas that a purist will frown upon, right? And that did happen with us, and we ended up building a tool called a Snorkel. What that does is it allows you to it tells you the mistakes that you're making in terms of writing SQL queries, explainability. It gives you recommendations towards saying, looks like this is going to break in production, not immediately, but in the next 15 days, you might as well change certain things, right? So that's the tenet. A lot of things around productivity at UDAAN is by design. It's not really an afterthought, right? So that's how we sort of approached this problem in PC.
Thanks, Kaushik. That makes a lot of sense and very interesting. Also, thanks for actually bringing another element into this conversation, right? When we talk about DevOps, the focus usually immediately goes to tooling and automation, which is obviously a big part of that. But let's not forget, there's also two other, very important aspects, which is the cultural aspects, like you said, the blameless environment where developers can really, learn from each other, learn from their experiences, and of course, tools play a major part in giving developers, an experience that is satisfying and as much as possible on, padded by guardrails, obviously. But there's also, processes and improvements that can be made in terms of your development sort of life cycle, right? In general. Maybe Tim, this is probably something that I wanted to ask you as well. Seems to me that there's also another element around the innovation that's coming into the space, right? Around, obviously, there's trends that are helping us move and accept the move towards the cloud, even in regulated spaces as of late. We've also seen the introduction of revolutionary tools like generative AI, like GitHub Copilot to name one. But obviously, how are you how are you and your team sort of impacted by these by these trends and maybe these investments? Is this something you are investigating, or what's your story in that sense?
Yeah, it's definitely, we need to stay ahead of the curve, and the curve's moving quicker than it ever has before. So it's absolutely critical that we do that, and it does come back to, in order to ensure we have the best possible environment for our engineers to work in, we have to give them access to the best technologies. And that needs to come irrespective of what the potential risks might be. So we need to be able to break those down, understand what they are, and address them in as rapid a way as we possibly can. And that's where the mindset and cultural element comes into it. And it really is about having an attitude and almost a predisposition to understanding the risk that the business is willing to take, and therefore being able to talk in meaningful terms across all aspects of the teams to the risk proposition that's there for the business. So if we think about it in terms of almost the SecDevOps approach, having an equal amount of input from the security expertise on the team versus the operational expertise on the team versus the developers, and having that free flow of information amongst the team in a facilitated way, which for us is right now is a combination of GitHub in terms of automation and understanding where things are, Azure DevOps, and being able to really kind of track what's happening in the teams, and bringing all those things together and make sure that all of those various views and opinions and approaches are actually represented in the conversations, and doing that in an effective and efficient way actually accelerates the teams. Whereas previously, I think when you start to bring your cyber and risk people into a conversation, it actually slowed things down. We're actually seeing that becomes almost the opposite when you put them in on that level playing field, with an expectation that, as a given, they will respect each other and they will recognize the domain expertise of everybody in the room in an effort to actually move things forward.
Yes, yeah, and basically a shared sort of responsibility model where developers and security experts really bring their, like you said, their core expertise to the same table and actually focus on the right outcomes. Beautiful. Okay, I have there's quite a lot of activity in the Q&A, so I definitely want to make sure we have time for our audience to ask you all questions. But I have one last one that I'd love to touch on, which is if you want to share any tips, lessons learned with our audience. There's obviously for those in the audience who want to maybe embark on a similar sort of transformation and a similar journey. What would be your top pro tips or maybe lessons learned that you'd love to share with them? Let's see. Let's start maybe with Helen.
The first one I want top of my mind is autonomy, and that's need to take the balance out, because when I say autonomy, it can be a lot of things. Like, the engineers may take as freedom to do everything. It's not that. It's actually within the guardrail that you give them the flexibility to innovate, to test and learn, to do your research and development. So in a safe environment, they can fail and they can make mistakes. The autonomy is like, you can try any tool you want, any software you want, and then provide it, select the one that will, maybe few, that works for the organization. Then look at how we scale and implement that across, the group. So autonomy is very important. What I found is if we don't give our engineers, sort of the freedom of choice, autonomy, is what they found. It becomes like a steering committee to make every single decision. So it takes forever for them to just even evaluate what is, or select or find the right solution to implement. That is taking a lot of the time. So I would say autonomy is a key to transformation in terms of increase productivity, velocity for the organization. So that's how I see it. But how we implement it, it depends on the business and the nature that you're in. So it's not one size fits all. And even across the bank, we actually have guardrails in terms of all the test and learn. We've actually create an environment and a space for them to do anything that they want. But that does not touch any of our production data or production system, because we're running a bank. We cannot, our risk posture or appetite for leaking customer data is zero. Basically, we had zero tolerance, and when it comes to people's financial well-being and all that stuff that can impact our customer and impacting the financial system, that is we need to take the balance act on that.
Amazing. Sounds like, if you allow me to rephrase, right, seems like the key ingredient here is to try as much as possible to find that happy middle, like that sweet spot, right, that allows organizations to, as much as possible, standardize on common approaches and maybe a common platform, but also at the same time acknowledging the need for teams, with different focus areas to have their own needs, their own additional requirements. And so finding a platform like GitHub where you can integrate things together will help you, in general, achieving that balance. Kaushik, how about yourself? What would be your pro tip for the audience?
So one of the things, and this might be slightly controversial, but it's the power of the collective. There is no one team. There is no DevOps team, or there is no DevSecOps team that is responsible for uptimes or for engineering experience. At UDAAN, we've been majorly successful in doing it, and this is also true about GitHub, I'm assuming, where you would have everybody contribute to a variety of problem statements. There are no walled gardens, right? You face a problem, you obviously create a guilt-free, safe environment for engineers to work on, and then you invite engineers to contribute towards making systems more intelligent, robust, right? I think that's what has been hugely successful for us at UDAAN. There isn't an engineer who would say that this is not my problem. Of course, there are people who end up creating those guardrails. There are gatekeepers to each of these systems, but every single individual at UDAAN contributes towards making this safety net more and more robust over time. So that's my recommendation.
And I'm sure that obviously requires, let's say, an effort in terms of training, cultural sort of, overcoming challenges like that to make sure that there is a shared mindset and collaborative approach.
Absolutely. That's a great point, right? I think it does. What you should also be doing is, sort of creating an environment where people feel excited about these problems, right? And they are exciting problems. They are hard problems, but then you end up learning so much from it. You create an environment that rewards these behaviors, right? I think that's been my learning, and some of the best suggestions have come from rank freshers who sort of come in, no bias, no baggage, and they come up with some of the most modern advancements that have happened, and sort of the pitch in, right? I think, so that's been my learning, if you mean. So sort of make it open for everybody to come and contribute.
Yeah, thanks, Kaushik. So Tim, how about you? What's your TLDR sort of pro tip to share today?
It's actually not all that different from what Helen and Kaushik have talked about, but environment. And for me in particular, if I think about the industry and the company that I'm in, 150-year-old accountancy, right? And it is not the friendliest environment for an engineer to operate in, just in general. And so making sure that we've provided not just the tooling, but also a safe environment for engineers to do what engineers do, which is a big part of creativity and experimentation and problem solving, which is quite different from the typical expertise and high level of skill set professionalism for a professional services firm. So there is a lot of work to ensure that the team has the right environment in terms of tools and access to technologies, but also culturally and organizationally that they're in the right place and can be as successful as possible.
Very interesting. Yeah, and we do find that correlation between developer happiness and productivity, right? The two things are very connected, and there's studies out there, including Nicole Forsgren's latest space framework analysis, which I recommend. So maybe we can drop a link in the chat for those who are interested. Anyway, great conversation. I think we could go on for way longer. Time is ticking though, and I would like to maybe now change gears for a moment and invite our one and only Mish Menering on stage to help with the Q&A. Mish, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's been a fantastic conversation so far. And the first question that I wanted to ask that is coming from the chat is actually, you just mentioned the word about 2 seconds ago, PG, which is this idea of happiness, right? Developer happiness. So one of the questions coming from the chat is, how do we ensure we have that developer happiness by ensuring we have a stress-free development lifecycle? So how do we get that stress-free development lifecycle? Anyone want to start us off?
Who wants to take it?
Maybe
start us off, Tim.
So for me, it's all about assessing and reducing cognitive load. So where the highest level of stress is going to come from an engineer who's trying to do something that they're not really supposed to be doing, but they're having to do it because of other factors. Yeah, so someone who's trying to actually just build stuff, and all of a sudden they're having to worry about how to push something out into a cloud environment. And so anything we can be doing to reduce the cognitive burden on our developers is massively impacting their happiness.
Let me just add to what Tim said. So there are two aspects to this. One is a sense of not just implementing the problem, but why are you sort of going about implementing whatever you're implementing? A sense of purpose. I think that intrinsically makes engineers not look at it as a task. So there's that aspect. And then when you actually go about implementing certain things, you're not necessarily worrying about every other artifact that you have to take care of, because you already have systems in place, automation in place that is there to have, it is there to get your back. So it has your back in terms of you, it not allowing mistakes to happen. If there are regular mistakes, it sort of takes care of not making those mistakes to happen. So reducing anxiety, right? One is a sense of purpose, and then the other aspect would be to reduce anxiety as you go about doing what you're doing. I would imagine these two would lead to a better engineering experience, and thus lowering the stress, if you may.
I have a slightly different answer when I say happiness. As an engineer myself, I found happiness and joy when I tackle and solve a problem using code, using the tech tool, whatever that is. It could be a business problem or a technical problem. And I make that, happen, as in resolve it, address it through what I do. That gave me a lot of happiness. For example, seeing end user using the software I built, or seeing, this go into production and it solve a big problem that we face at that point in time. And coming back to, as an engineer point of view, how I see happiness is we should always think of the challenge, the problem solving outcome perspective, and give it to the engineer to come up with the solution. What personally, I would find it really annoying if I get a ticket to just build this feature, but without understanding what am I building, who am I building it for, who's going to use my software or the code that I write. That happiness is a culture thing. We make sure basically our engineer is basically almost like touching or feeling how our end user using our product is going to feel, and how we make an impact to the end user, to our customer or client at that point in time. And I tie that back to what makes me happy as an engineer is that job satisfaction, and that can keep going as an engineer. Yeah,
I love those answers. They're so good. And I think another way that we can develop a happiness and reducing stress is to ensure we have really good productivity. There's a lot of questions in the chat about productivity, especially being a panel about efficiency. So one of the questions is around, how do we plan to have that really good productivity throughout the development lifecycle?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, I think I started off by saying this. I think it's important to measure. I think it's important to have the right metrics in place. I think for each of the subsystems, you're really looking at how many deployments, and of course that could be an L0 metric, and you could also have L1 metrics like how many rollbacks or how many failures in an integration environment. How many times did the infrastructure components that you work on go south for whatever reasons. It could be your database had an issue, there were issues with indexing, or it could be about not necessarily having the right kind of backward compatibility. So there are a bunch of things, right, there in terms of your L1 metrics, your L0 metrics that you look at when you're looking at measuring productivity. But again, these are just metrics. Ultimately, what's important is once your feature actually goes to production, does it really do what it was supposed to do? Right? Does it really solve the problem that it was supposed to solve from a functional standpoint? Does it scale as a basis whatever contracts that were agreed upon in terms of scale? Those things, once you've actually made a particular feature live to production, that is extremely important. I can't stress enough, because what you do otherwise is you go back into a cycle of again releasing certain things to production, but really you are running at the same place on a treadmill, right? What you really want to do is you want to move forward, and that is important. So is it really a functional success? Is it a non-functional success in terms of scaling? I think these things are important to measure as well.
I think that's really good that you mentioned the word metrics and measurement. So I'll ask a follow-up question, which is also coming from the chat, which how do we actually measure the efficiency of these tools? You're talking about, we need to measure it to ensure our productivity. How do we measure the efficiency of these tools. And I guess one of the follow-up questions to that too, also coming from the chat, is how does GitHub help in measuring the productivity? So maybe if Tim and Helen would like to answer a little bit on the measuring, and maybe PG, you can add in any pieces for the what GitHub can do to help measure those productivity tools.
Yeah, and Kaushik just talked about this, but the key thing is understanding what matters, right? And making sure that there's clarity for everyone involved in the process on not only what is important and what matters, but what I can be doing to influence those measures that matter. And so, you know, if the customer drive is, you know, something has to be released on a particular cycle and the timelines are most important, then, you know, we need to know what those metrics are and be able to measure against that and make sure that we understand. If it's, you know, have to get everything totally sorted in terms of security and reviews before we can move into the next step, and there's a clear gating process and the guardrails around it, then we need to understand what those metrics are. What we've started to do is work really in a portfolio context where each team has a clear set of KPIs that are driving the whole project and the whole team. And then each of the disciplines, and you know, if we've got an engineering team and a tech lead, and then, you know, a DevOps component of that project, they each have their own measures that are related directly to the overall team measures that they're able to track and measure their performance against. Without that clarity, it all becomes a bit of a muddy mess of the blame game around, well, you know, I did my thing, but someone else over there didn't do it right, and now it's broken. And we actually need to get out of that individual mindset and actually think about productivity as a team, and bring that back into the tooling to be able to measure it and keep it visible for everyone.
Cool. In terms of metrics, we actually have quite a lot of metrics that we track in the bank. I actually want to touch on the how many commit or deployment. It actually is not the right measure, because we try that and developer can gamify that to their, you know, advantage by adding a small line of code or whatever to make another release. And actually that's a wrong thing we should track, what we learn from the behavioral. And to Tim's point, is like what matters. So now we're actually measuring what from, you know, picking up that ticket saying I need to build feature blah, acceptance criteria is A, B, C, D, and to actually commit PR like into GitHub in terms of the code to when they release into production. That's what I mean by, you know, when you actually cut it to when you release it. That's we're measuring how long does it take and how many bugs did it picked up in system test, unit test, performance tests, and stuff like that. And how many times do we have to go back with this feature or user story to keep on rebuild, refactor the code to get it right before we ship to production. That's what we measure productivity, because if we're purely taking one slice of metrics and not measuring the end-to-end value, what it could create is the gamifying, you know, behavior of saying, hey, I've deployed this 10 times, I built this 100 times, I compiled this code, whatever, and I raised, you know, 10 PR or 20 PR a day, I'm hitting my checkbox. That's actually what we're saying is the wrong thing to measure. The right thing to measure is based on this sort of business requirement, or it could be a tech debt ticket, because we take tech debt and requirements same. It doesn't matter, it's basically picking up this workload. How long does it take for the engineers finish addressing the issue or build the new feature or resolve a fix or whatever and ship that into production. That's how we measure it. How long does it take for us to get to the final outcome and the result? On top of that, I want to add on is on the metric space, we actually adopt, you know, the SRE principle across the bank, measuring, you know, things are running in production, but if something happened, which it does every day, right? Nothing is always perfect. how long does it take for us to restore the service, like your MTTR, your, all those DORA metrics. We're measuring that as well from SLO, SLI, SLA perspective, as in how happy is our customer using our product and services, rather than how fast just we ship stuff into production. That's productivity is important, velocity is important, but what if quality was suffering, by increased productivity? That's something we don't want to see. So we always take the balance, as in what is the right level of, governance, control, and checking we need to have, and also what is the availability and resilience we should have in production. These are the stuff that we constantly need to measure on the end-to-end value and the business impact.
And PG, did you want to mention a couple of the GitHub features and tools that we might have to measure this kind of productivity?
Yeah, definitely. I think actually before that, I wanted to comment a little bit on what Tim and Helen said. And I think, really the the key takeaway, right, if I wanted to maybe summarize a little bit, is make sure to measure output and not just activity, right? Like Helen said, activity can be very easily gamed. And I think developers by nature sort of maybe may gravitate towards that behavior, right? But I think in general, if you look at measuring, like you said, output, so things that really matter to the business, that also bring it back to what Tim said earlier around, developer, purpose, right? So having a sense of shared purpose between the teams and the individual developers to bring it all back. But yes, we do have, of course, capability built in GitHub to help measure it. Things like what Helen was calling the MTTR, so the mean time to remediation. As part of GitHub Advanced Security, it's possible to track how we're doing when things go wrong, which they do. So there's no way we can probably look at security as something that's ever going to be a completed challenge. It's always going to be part of, I think, of the software development life cycle. So the question is really more around how long does it take, for a developer to identify and resolve a security incident, but also just in general, the general DORA metrics as well. We heard about mean time to market, or from ideation to production. How can we measure the actual effectiveness of our development teams? And definitely GitHub has built-in insights and other features that help, I would say, product managers or engineering leads keep an eye on this from an overview sort of perspective. And happy to share more maybe after this call if you're interested.
Sounds good. I would love to ask so many more questions because there's a lot coming through the chat. But I wanted to end on this question because I think it ties everything together really nicely. And that question is around creativity, ideation, innovation. Now, we know that development teams are often on time constraints. So how do we actually maintain productivity, perhaps within a time constraint, but also allow for ideas to flow and flourish? Like, what are your thoughts on those things, Tim, Kaushik, and Helen, as we wrap up this fantastic chat?
I'll start first.
Yep.
Across the organization, as part of the engineering transformation, I'll show my t-shirt, we're actually promoting the 20% engineering time across all our technologies in the bank. And that's what we want to drive innovation and ideation and creativity. So the 20% time is not just there, do whatever pet project you want. It's actually, we encourage the collaboration cross teams. So across the bank, like even though I'm on retail banking, but I can collaborate with someone on business banking, so on and so forth, to work on a challenge that the business, face and come up with ideas. So that's what we mean by innovation, creativity. We don't have boundary on that, but we give basically the 20% time to our engineers to come up with these ideas to tackle, some of the challenge or problem that business may face. So that's how we sort of embrace that sort of innovation, creativity, and by giving them the time and the space to think and collaborate.
I think we've got 30 seconds if you want to hear really quickly from Tim and Chris. That's all right, before we wrap up.
I definitely think it's about giving people time. And my argument to management is that, has always been to management that engineering is a creative discipline, and people need the bandwidth to be able to be creative. And so it has to be baked in to our estimations that people need that flexibility to be able to do it. And there's lots of ways to do that, 20%. And we take time out kind of on a quarterly basis. We give 2 days to people to do that type of stuff and run hackathons and those kind of things. But it's understanding that at the most fundamental level, it's a creative discipline.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll have to end on that, unfortunately. So I will pass it back to PG to wrap us up. And thank you all for answering the questions from our chat.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mish, for helping us with the Q&A. And also I would like to obviously thank our panelists today. So thank you, Kaushik, Tim, and Helen. This was a fantastic conversation. So I really appreciate you taking the time and joining us today. As you can see on screen, we are already towards the end of this 3-day series of conversations and sessions as part of GitHub Galaxy. There is one more. It's actually starting in 30 minutes. So please be sure to join for one last session with Karthik and Shilpa, who will be busting some common GitHub myths and also chat about how you can improve your DevOps toolchain. We'll be sending a follow-up email once all the recordings are able to watch on demand. So definitely make sure to check your inbox. Before we wrap up, I would like to just say that if anything you've heard on this call today sounded interesting and you wanted to have a chat with us at GitHub, please make sure to use the book a meeting button on the top of your screen, and we'll get in touch with you shortly. And lastly, as we wrap the session up, I'd like to also please ask you all to take a minute or two to complete a very short survey about your experience with us today. You'll find the link in the survey in the Documents tab on the right, or you can scan the QR code. That's very handy on screen right now. We designed this program for you, and we want to be sure that you're getting the most value out of your time here. So please share your feedback. We do take it seriously, and we hope to improve through these learnings to optimize future programs to continue to raise the bar for you. So don't be shy. Tell us what you think. And with that, once again, thank you all for joining, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.